we going? Yeah, sound effect. Right, so we've got a basic equation of energy expenditure and energy intake we know about. So energy intake must be less than energy expenditure to lose weight. Yeah, we're comfortable with that. Okay. But then, so we think that going to the gym expends energy. Yeah? But energy expenditure is greater than just going to the gym because there's many facets of energy expenditure. If anyone watch any of you watch some of my videos, say it? Right, so if we look at energy expenditure, so we could say calories in, we want them to be less than calories. Yeah, makes sense? Right. Calories out is basically your metabolism. Does that make sense? Right, so metabolism. I got 4 things that make it up. Do we know any of them? Do we know anything of them? No? So if I start with basal metabolic rate. Do we know what that is? Yeah, exactly. So just basically the amount of calories it takes to sustain your weight at rest when you're just sat there, okay? That's probably the biggest one. And I'm doing this because when I'm talking about what we're doing in the gym, this is going to refer back to these things as well. So this one makes up most of the time. Like right now, you're not expending energy other than the fact that you're sat there and you need energy just to be alive. That make sense? Right, another one. Any ideas? The big one which we're talking about here is the long-winded term is exercise-induced thermogenesis, which just means heat produced. Well, actually, Claire probably knows better than I do what thermogenesis is. But that's heat produced from burning energy. So that is when you go to the gym and you deliberately go to the gym to expend energy and burn calories. Okay? Next one we can have is non-exercise. Same. What would that comprise of? Do we know? So nothing. Yeah, basically. So if you walked here, or like my car broke down a couple of weeks ago, so I've had to walk and get the bus everywhere. And so this part is higher than it was. Okay. Now one thing, walking the dog. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to be honest with you, anything that is not just you laying flat is that one. Right? People don't think about that. Now one thing is, the more of this one you do, your body's really good at staying at the same level. And so the more of this one you do, your body knows to do less of this. So I don't know if you've ever been to the gym and then you come home and you're so tired you do less than normal. Because it's your body's way of balancing it all out. So almost if you're just using the gym to lose weight, there's no point in doing this one if this one is going to go down the counter. Any ideas on the last way that your body expends energy?
Protein intake.
Which?
Protein intake.
What do protein? What do you mean?
If you eat too much more protein, it kind of has that same effect.
So, yeah, it's sort of more general than that. It's just the food that you eat. So it's called the thermic effect of food. So everything you eat takes calories to digest. On average, about 10% of what you eat, actually the calories gets burned in digesting the food. Now, but that's for another day, but this one, that's why people say eat whole foods. Do you know what I mean by whole foods? So as in things that aren't refined. So I've probably said this a lot before, like I was talking to you about this yesterday, I think, wasn't it? So like the brown rice will take more calories to digest than the white rice, because the white rice is just the brown rice with the casing taken off. It's like fruit takes more calories to digest than fruit juice. A steak will take more calories to digest than a burger. So that's why eating whole foods tends to burn more calories here. Okay? Right, now this, therefore, that's what makes up your energy expenditure. Energy intake, that's a whole other matter. Now, when we're doing exercise, that affects some of these other things. Then we've got a tissue in. Thank you. So, thanks a lot. Right, do we grasp that? Yeah. Any questions on that? No? Okay, alright. Right, so we're just looking out of that at number 2. We're going to look at number 2 on its own, but then also how number 2 affects the others as well. Now typically, what do people use to lose weight in the gym? What sort of exercise? Cardio. Thank you, there we go, good. Right, I'm going to split this in a couple of columns, right? We'll have, cardio. And then, crudely, what other sort of training do we have? Weight training, yeah. So we can have, I'll call it resistance training. So I'll write RT. Now, like I've had some of you, we've been doing on the bike, that's high intensity, which I'm going to group in with this one. So basically this, I'm going to call this a sort of long duration, lower intensity, right? Whereas this I'm going to make short duration, high intensity, okay? So have you heard of, they call it HIIT training, you were talking about that. It just stands for high intensity interval training. So basically this side is things that, where you're working probably no longer than 30 seconds to a minute at a time and then you're having rest. Whereas this side is when you're going and you're on a bike or on a treadmill or on anything for 20 minutes, half an hour, long period. That make sense? Right. Right, I'm going to look at some of the differences and then therefore how they affect you from a weight loss perspective. So, first one, if you come, say we're coming into the gym for an hour, let's just use that as a blanket. So how long do you spend in the gym? Oh, about 45 euros. An hour and a half. So an hour is not far off what, okay, so say we're in the gym for an hour. If we came in and we're going to look at the total amount of mechanical work. So total work that you do in the gym. If you came in and you did a reasonable cardio session for an hour, you would end up doing quite a lot of overall work, right? So total work for that would be high. On this side of things, because a lot of your hour is spent resting, even though the work period is more intense, you're probably not going to actually do as much overall work as this. So if we do it properly, it would be moderate. If we don't do it properly, it could be low. Okay? So obviously, someone who's looking to bench press as much as possible will just come in and they will have a heavy weight and they will lift. The real heavyweights, maybe 1-3 reps, they'll rest a long time. They're not trying to lose weight though. They are doing this, but you can modify this to suit what you want. Does that make sense? So their work would be really low, but their intensity would be really high. Whereas a marathon runner, their work would be really high, but their intensity would be really low. Yeah? Okay. So on the face of it, that's why when you say people use cardio to lose weight, this one seems like the more attractive proposition because you're actually burning more calories in the gym a lot of the time doing this one over this one. Make sense? Okay. Right, so those facets of metabolism, and I had your basal metabolic rate, so how many calories you burn at rest. Do we know what effect doing these a lot has on that? Got any ideas? Say again, Claire.
The RT has more effect because it's long.
Yeah, yes. That is, I was going to give yes. Yes. That is another point later, but basically, yes, it increases it. So if you're doing resistance training in particular, that increases your basal metabolic rate. The main thing that affects that is how much you weigh minus the fat. So fat is just stored energy. Whereas everything else needs calories to sustain your skin, your organs, and muscle. So if you have more muscle, then your basal metabolic rate is higher. So that increases it. A lot of low-level cardio, as I talk about a lot of the time, makes you fitter cardiovascular. So your heart's a bit bigger, you've got more capillaries, you're more energy efficient, you can do things easier. Now, the effect on that is, if you're trying to lose weight, you're trying to be energy inefficient. Does that make sense? Whereas, so being energy efficient, being fit or losing weight doesn't always go hand in hand like people just think as they associate one with the other. So this does the opposite in that it lowers. And if you're doing this, especially without this, then in terms of your lean size, you will decrease. Hence why, like a marathon runner is skinny. If you look at the physique of Mo Farah, and then you look at the physique of Usain Bolt, they're drastically different. Part of that's their genetics, but most of it is the way they train. So doing a lot of this just needs to lean tissue as little as possible. Because your body adapts to what you want to do. So if you're teaching it to run for half an hour at a time, say, then having a lot of weight is not going to help that man, but having less weight is. Does that make sense? But when I say weight, I don't mean fat, I'm talking about your lean weight as well. Okay? Right, let's look at how long. I said that we come in for an hour, but to do the same amount, usually you will take less time, so time taken. Usually this tends to be longer than this. Now obviously if you spend an hour, you spend an hour, but if you, usually when people go for, say those bike sprints I do with you at the end, how long does that take?
About 11 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes to do, and that workout, the equivalent done in the long duration would be at least half an hour. Okay. So usually, that's one advantage of using your time efficiently, is it takes less time to do this one than it does this one. So you can get more done in a short space of time here than here. Right, do we know anything? Let's have a look. Right. And so that says energy pathway, so that's how your body produces energy, right? But we've all heard of aerobic. Yeah? Do you know what does that mean? Do you know what that means? What does it mean? Do you know?
It needs the oxygen.
Say again?
For aerobic, it needs the oxygen.
Exactly. So that's in the presence of oxygen. Yes. And so when you're working, when I say aerobic exercise, what do you typically think of? Yeah. Yeah, long in cardiovascular, exactly. Now the thing with that, so there we go, cardio and aerobic. So that means with oxygen. Now that energy system is really, really energy efficient. Like I said, we're losing weight, we don't really want to be energy efficient, we want to be energy inefficient. So that energy system can produce energy over and over and over. You're using it right now predominantly, that's the one you're using, and I'm using it right now as well. It can produce energy over and over and over again. It can't produce energy at a really quick rate, but it can keep doing it forever, basically. Now, when you start to jog, for example, your heart rate goes up. And that's just because you need more oxygenated blood because you're working aerobically. This sort of training, what's the flip side of aerobic? Do we know what it's called? It sounds very similar. Anaerobic, yeah. That's going to go with hot now, isn't it? And therefore, so if this one is with oxygen, this one is without oxygen. Now, the only reason you would have to perform, your body would rather produce energy with oxygen because it's more comfortable. So only if you're working at a high intensity where you have to produce energy without oxygen. Now we've had, if you're lifting weights or you're sprinting, presumably you've had a burning sensation. Yes? A little bit. You're not working hard though. Now that is just, that's lactic acid, which will only be produced as a byproduct of working without oxygen. Because it'd be too good to be true if you had an energy system where you could just produce energy quicker and that would be fine. There's got to be a catch, and the catch is you'll fatigue quicker as well. Now that energy system therefore is less energy efficient. And so, does that make sense? If you're less energy efficient, that usually is going to be better for losing weight because you're spending more energy in a short space of time. Okay? Right, the one when I asked about metabolism before, I kind of split it up a little bit. There's a thing called EPOC, which just stands for exercise post-oxygen consumption. So in other words, how many calories you burn when you finished exercising. Now, that will be, if you're working aerobically, your body will continue to work aerobically after you finish. And your metabolism will be up a little bit to do the work. So you have to burn more calories to go for a jog. But if it's not too far out of its comfort zone, then it can quickly return back to where it was. That makes sense? So this is low with this. You're not having to expend much energy when you're finished because your body's not going that far out of its comfort zone. The further you take out of its comfort zone, the longer it takes to return back. And so here, if you've done this properly and you've worked hard, that's going to be high. So if you're sore, are you sore today? Not too bad. I think 2 days might be worse for it. If you're sore, that's just inflammation, which is your body repairing the little tears in the muscle. When you've got a burn and that's lactic acid, that's usually, you're talking hours later with that, but that will take a lot of calories for your body to get out of the system. It doesn't want your blood, your muscle to be full of lactic acid, that's a problem. So it has to work harder to return you back to rest with this than this. Let's see, yeah, that would. So basically what we started here, the work is higher than here. It looks good to start with when you go with cardio. But then when you look at how it affects everything else, the problem with the cardiovascular work is slow down your basic metabolic rate. It takes a long time to do it. You're using a really energy efficient system, and after you finish working out, you pretty much go back to normal straight away. Whereas with this sort of stuff, it actually increases your basic metabolic rate. I always quote, there's a study I've read, a 10-week training program, either jogging half an hour 3 times a week, or doing resistance training with big movements, which I'll go into later. For 10 weeks, and they looked at their basic metabolic rate at the start of the 10-week program and at the end. This group had reduced it by 200 calories a day. They were now 200 calories a day more efficient. They needed 200 calories a day less just to survive. This one, they managed to increase it by 400. So there's after 10 weeks, obviously it was a well-designed program. It was about 4 times a week, but within 10 weeks, you have 600 calories a day switch from doing this rather than doing this. Yeah, time taken, you don't need to spend as long doing this. You're using a less energy efficient way of producing energy. And you're burning calories for up to days after you're finished with this. I've seen 2 days later an elevated metabolism with a heavy weight training session, whereas you're never going to get that with this one. Alright, that makes sense? Right. That's all been quite theoretical, right? So I haven't actually told you what you can do, have I? So that's coming now. I never like to say what to do without why, you know? And if you have that, if you know why, you can make your own informed decisions, can't you? Right, so in terms of, we'll look at resistance training first. Okay. Now we've got I could split it in many ways. One way I could split it would be isolation or compound movement. We know what that means. Any ideas? What I mean by that? Yes, exactly. So by that I mean joints. So an isolation exercise would be something like bicep curl. You're isolating one joint. Okay. The problem with that is, I mean, it's great if you want bigger arms, and doing this is one way to do it and make sure you're not training anything else. But your overall energy expenditure, it's never going to be that much with that. That one example I use is that one compared with, in here is we will do a lat pull down. We probably all used it. And now you're using elbow joint and shoulder joint. So it's only 2 biceps. Now you're using the back of your shoulder and the big muscles in your back. And so you're automatically going to expend more energy with compound movements than isolated ones. So there's no point wasting your time doing isolated movements if you're trying to train for losing weight. And sometimes I see people on weight loss programs, and they've gone half the way by doing a bit of weight training, but then I see them like doing shoulder raises and things like this, and actually you're missing the wood for the trees really. If you look at exercise you can lift the most weight, that's usually a good indicator. You can move more weight and more distance, then you've got to spend more energy to do. That makes sense? Okay. Say again, sorry. Okay. Yes. I will tell you, give me another 5 minutes and then I will talk about that in a second, do something. But yeah, okay. Right, there we go, here's number one. In terms of volume, so the volume of work that you do in a session, you obviously want that to be high. So if you come in and you just go, say you do really good exercises, you come in and you do some squat, you only do 2 sets, and then you do some leg press where you do two sets. You might do four really good exercises, but we're going to do 2 exercises per set. The total amount of volume of work isn't that high. So you need to be doing the highest volume of work. Now by that though, I would say, do you know what I mean by a set? Do you know what I mean by a set? So say I said you want you to go on the leg press and want you to do 5 sets of 10. Obviously 10 would be the repetitions. 1 set 10, that's 1 set. Yeah? You'd probably be looking around about 30-ish sets in a session overall. Give or take, depends how experienced you are with training and that sort of thing. Right, rest. How much rest do you need? Any ideas? A minute? 30 seconds? Why? Why? Do you know why was it? Yeah. 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 Basically the harder it is, the more you need to rest. Yeah. Okay. Now the thing is, if you rest too short, the problem is you can never make the actual exercise all that hard. And then when we were talking about cardio versus high intensity before, if you don't really rest, then it's cardio, isn't it? So sometimes I say to people, they'll tell me that they use resistance. I'm like, okay. And I'll say, how many sets you do? So I'm 5. And I'm like, okay, how long do you rest? They'll say 10 seconds maybe. Now if they're doing the thing is, so they go, I'll do 5 sets of 10. I'm like, okay, good. And then they'll say, I'll rest 10 seconds. Really, you're doing 50 repetitions or something. So it might be taking you 5 minutes to do it. And the weight's going to be so light, you're not really stressing yourself at a high intensity. If the intensity be high, then possibly rest. And that's a problem that some people just think more is better all the time. Like sometimes when I'm taking the pump class in here, and people just want to do more. They don't want to do it at better quality, and they don't want to necessarily do it higher. They just want to do more and more. But the more you do, the more it just becomes cardio. So you do need rest. The problem comes is we've got to have a balance between doing lots of work and then getting enough rest so that it's intense. So the ratio, thank you, great question. For most of the research, a ratio of about 1-to-1 work to rest. At most, this is from a weight loss perspective, 2-to-1, as in 2 parts rest to 1 part work. If you're going less than 1-to-1, it's becoming cardio. The intensity isn't going to be all that high, really. So say you were doing 10 repetitions or something, it might take you 30 seconds to do that if you're doing it at a proper tempo. Now, so to counter that, you want about 30 seconds to a minute. Exactly, yeah. Right, so I'll move this visual so it's easy. So, let's start with repetitions or something. Do we know how many is a good number for weight loss? I usually go. Yeah? What's that face?
I was thinking 5 to 10.
You were thinking?
I thought you had to go heavy and have slower reps for weight.
Well, why lower? What's lower?
About 5.
5. See, I wouldn't go that low.
Okay.
I wouldn't go that low. If you were using 5, you'd have to make the rest extremely short. So, because if you're doing 5, it's not going to take you more than 15 seconds. Well.
So if we were doing, say, 50 kilo deadlift,
Yeah.
5 reps,
Yeah.
It's not as good as 30 kilo deadlift 8 reps.
The thing is, you probably lift more than 30 kilo for 10 minutes. That's the thing on that weight. But you'll adapt to anything if you do it the same over and over and over. So it is good to change it. As a blanket rule, I tend to keep it roughly in that range, which is usually the best. Guys who want to get more muscular will use this rep range. Now, ladies, don't ever put on a significant amount of muscle naturally. Also, they will play around with the amount they're eating. They will, if they're trying to get bigger, they will eat a lot of food. And their rest times will be longer than if you're trying to lose weight as well. But this is the best one for preservation of muscle. And when we talk about it's got to be intense to give you a prolonged calorie burn effect and boost your metabolism, all that stuff, it's got to be reasonably heavy, where 5 would be really good for that. But then we've got to factor in with the total amount of work. So to give your example there, if you did 5 repetitions with 50 kilos, that's 250 kilos of work. If you did 10 reps, you'd actually probably be able to lift 40. And that would be 400 kilos of total work. So on one you've done 250 kilos of mechanical work, the other. So there's that factor as well. So you're trying to maximise both the intensity and the volume. Does that make sense? So that's why usually I'd go there. Rest, therefore, usually, if that takes around about 30 seconds, you'd be around 30 at most. I wouldn't ever go over 60 seconds. You're getting towards full recovery, and the longer you rest, the more you're training to get stronger. The less you rest, the more you train your cardiovascular system. We're hitting that middle range again. Okay? Now another thing is free weight versus machine weight. Now I know some. Who here uses free weight? I know you do. Yeah, Claire definitely doesn't know. Ever used that at all? The thing with free weight is you'll need balancing. So an example would be the leg press. And I often tell people to go on the leg press because it uses big muscles and the lower arm body uses a lot of joints. And you'll know from using it, you can lift more weight in the leg press probably than any other machine. So great for energy expense. But if you replace that with put the bar on your back and then squat automatically, now your arms, your lower back, your calves, they're all stabilising the movement. You're lifting the weight in your back plus you're lifting most of your own body weight. So there's usually a superior version of a machine weight with free weight. Just needs a bit of technique basically, doesn't it? That's one. Hey, there's similar ones. There's pushing weight over your head with a couple of dumbbells. Or there's learning to squat just with a weight in each hand. Even that, just it's better than using that stuff. Also, just generally for transferability to everyday life, you're better off lifting something you need to balance. Those machines they're not very functional. That's the rule. Yeah. All right. Right. If we look at resistance training is one thing. So I'm talking about repetitions, about 8 to 12, rest about 30 to 60 seconds. Use compound movements. We know what body parts would be better in terms of what area of your body would be best to work out for general weight loss. Exactly, spot on, yes. So the biggest muscle that we all have is the glute maximus. But then at the same time, obviously the circumference of your thigh is much bigger than the circumference of your upper arm. But because obviously you've got to walk around all day, if you walk around on your arms, you will not squeeze them. So you're generally better off prioritising lower body. So that's why I think people leg press a good one, squats, deadlifts, lunges, movements like that. Because if you're moving the most weight with them, you can expend the most energy. If you're using upper body, then like I said earlier, not just something that uses your arms, but then it's bringing your shoulders, your chest, your back, bigger muscle groups. Alright? So the other one, apart from resistance training, is the interval training. Now, and you know that I use a bike with people a lot of the time. The reason I use the bike, most research I've read uses a bike. But that's just because it's practical in that you can suddenly increase your speed. If you did it on a treadmill, it's really hard to suddenly start going a lot quicker or a lot slower, whereas the bike you can just... Now, do we know what sort of... Based on what I've said there, you could work out your own routine really. Because how long would you work for? How long would you want as a period of work? As in,
On the point,
yeah.
10, 15 minutes.
Yes. But then how long, so within the 10 to 15 there's going to be work periods and there's going to be rest periods. Yeah? So how long would you want the work periods to be?
30 seconds.
Ish.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Exactly. So it's the same, it's very similar to the weight training really. You're doing 10 repetitions or something, it's probably going to take you about 30 seconds. And a similar equivalent would be on a bike, is you pedal either all out or almost for about 30 seconds. Now then, if you were using resistance training, you'd have a rest of 30, 60 seconds. Same thing, you'd have a rest 30, 60 seconds. The only difference comes if you're using weight, say you're doing 5 sets and you're on a fixed weight, they're not all going to be the failure. Does that make sense? So you're not going to be lifting literally, and you don't want to be too far off, but they're not going to be all as hard as you possibly can. Now, if you were on a bike, you literally, as you know, pedal as fast as you can, 30 seconds, you're going to need a little bit longer rest, because that is going to be harder than one of your. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the harder you work, the longer you do need to rest. The harder you work, the less volume you can get away with, because you burn more calories doing it, and the afterburn effect is increased as well. So that's why sometimes I will, now I kind of counted what you said earlier when you said 5 reps, but the typical protocol I used to start people off on a bike is usually 45 seconds easy, and just a 15-second all out, just to get them used to it. Then afterwards you can play with different things. That makes sense? Right, that's most of what I wanted to cover. Have we got any general questions about things? Yeah. Right, it was good. Yeah. 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 I hear that. I do hear that a lot. Right, now the problem with this is you can't choose where your fat's stored or where you're losing it. That's dependent on genetics, and it's dependent on hormones, basically your endocrine system, which affects everything. And so hence why women tend to have bigger hips. You rarely see a man with big hips. Is that fair to say? Men. Pardon? Exactly. It wouldn't be Mother Nature, there's no point in doing it. It tends to be, typically a higher level of estrogen is associated with more fat storage on the hips. Higher level of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, tends to be associated with more on the stomach. But you can't, whilst you can affect it a little bit, and with training and your diet and lifestyle you can affect it a bit, you can't, if you've generally got bigger hips, you're always going to have. Yes, no, but that's not, no, if you tend to store more fat in your hips than your arms, say, you're always going to tend to have slightly more. The total volume, by all means, can be decreased as much as you want, but your shape in terms of where the fat is can't be. It's not really. And some people have made quite a lot of money in trying to tell people that they can you'll find programs that say, take X, Y, and Z supplement and I can help reduce your level of this hormone. You come across this? And really, if you look in the science, you can't really do that much. So it's, like you say, it's general weight loss that is the thing. And that's the biggest, one big flaw I see is people going on the ab crunch. People love the ab crunch machine because they're thinking it's going to help get rid of the belly. But really, if you look at what I've said there, it's isolating these muscles. So the total and you're only moving the weight this far. So the total energy expenditure really isn't that great. If you replace that, with a squat, you would think, yeah, but hold on, that's my legs, that's not going to get. Your body will just choose where it wants to get the stored energy from. So you're just best off going for things with maximum overall energy expenditure and maximise your energy expenditure after you've left the gym. Does that make sense? That's not what you want to get. You can obviously, an exercise will tone a muscle in a certain area. And so extending your arm over your head will hit this muscle here. But that won't do anything directly for the fat there, it will just work that muscle. Now I know that's not what you want to hear. People make a lot of money telling me what they want to hear, but there's no reason you can't lose as much overall as you want. But you can't choose where. Anything else? In terms of, you can target an area's, the muscle in an area, 100%, absolutely. But you can't target where that loss comes from. That's an overall matter, yeah. I promise you that. If anyone tells you differently, then either they're trying to sell you something or they've been brainwashed by someone else who's sold them something. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And then from that, look at things to produce most overall energy expenditure. And so, don't, like I said, get rid of bigger wings, just doing a tricep extension whilst and you probably feel it. So you think in your head, you feel it working there. I'm losing the fat from there. That's not true. You're after an overall energy expenditure. That would be much better for losing the fat from there than just extend your arm. Alright? Anything else? Any other questions at all? No? Alright. Want to turn that off today?